My name is Diana Mercer. I'm 38 years old. The morning after my mother's funeral, my stepfather's daughter handed me an eviction notice for the house my mother lived in for 31 years. I had 47 days to respond before the transfer of title became legally unchallenged. I responded on day 46 with a document none of them knew existed. It was a handwritten amendment, dated 14 months before my mother died, witnessed by her neighbor Margaret, and notarized at the UPS store on Broad Street at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. My mother had written my name into it with a blue ballpoint pen. She had signed it 3 times, once on each page, the way she signed everything that mattered to her. Paulette, that's my stepfather's daughter. She was sitting in the kitchen of that house when I walked in with my attorney. And I want to tell you what her face looked like when she read that amendment, because that moment is the reason I'm here. That moment is why I need you to hear this from the beginning. Before I get there, like and subscribe the channel and tell us from where you are watching in comments, because I need you to understand how we got to that kitchen table. This story does not make sense without everything that came before it. Go back with me. 11 years. Let me show you what my mother built and what someone tried to take from her before she was even cold in the ground. I am standing in the kitchen of my apartment in Clintonville, and it is 11 years ago, and my mother is on the phone telling me about the man she met at her grief support group. I am 27. She is 59. My father, her husband of 22 years, has been dead for 14 months. And I have been watching my mother try to figure out who she is without him with a kind of painful tenderness that I didn't know I was capable of. His name is Raymond, she says. He lost his wife to pancreatic cancer, very gentle, very quiet. I am stirring something on the stove that I'm not paying attention to anymore. How old? 63. Does he have kids? A pause, the particular kind of pause my mother used when she was deciding how much truth to offer. A daughter, Paulette. She lives in Westerville. Okay, I say. She's very close with him. Okay. Diana. What? I'm not asking permission, I'm just telling you. And that right there is my mother. Vivian Mercer. Born Vivian Ann Hooper in 1954 in Dayton, Ohio, the youngest of 4 children in a house where everything was second-hand except the love, which was abundant and loudly expressed. She moved to Columbus when she was 22 with my father, James, who was working at the county assessor's office and who had a laugh she once described to me as the sound of a problem solving itself. They bought the house on Fairview Avenue in 1989 when I was 2 years old. They paid off the mortgage in 2007. My mother used to say, and she meant it without any drama, that house is the only thing I have ever owned outright. No one can take it from me. She was proud of that. You have to understand how proud she was of that. My mother was a woman who clipped coupons not because she had to, but because waste offended her at a cellular level. She kept a garden in the back that produced tomatoes, so reliable you could set a calendar by them. She had a subscription to the Columbus Dispatch that she read every morning cover to cover, including the legal notices section, because she said you could tell a lot about a community by who was suing whom. She had opinions about paint colors, about the way news anchors read off teleprompters, about the precise temperature at which tomato soup stops being comforting and becomes just hot liquid. She was specific. She was attentive. She was, in the best possible sense of the word, unmovable when she'd made up her mind about something. My father died of a stroke in September of 2010. He was 61 years old, and he'd had a headache for 3 days that he kept calling, just a headache, until it wasn't. My mother was the one who found him. She was the one who called 911. She was the one who sat in the waiting room for 4 hours before a doctor came out and told her what she already knew on some level. She told me about it later, not the grief, but the practical part, the paperwork, the decisions, the insurance forms, the phone calls. She handled all of it herself. She was grieving while filling out forms, and she didn't stop moving for 6 months because she said if she stopped moving, she would lie down on that couch and never get up again. She was the strongest person I knew. I say that not as a eulogy and not as a sentiment. I say it as a fact the way you'd say it's raining. She joined the grief support group 18 months after my dad died. She went, she said, not because I need it, but because it would be rude not to help the people who do. She sat in that circle in the basement of First Lutheran on Henderson Road every other Tuesday, and she listened to people. And she brought them cookies she made from scratch because she said that you could not listen to someone's grief and offer them a store-bought Oreo without being a certain kind of person she did not want to be. Raymond was in that group. His wife, Carol, had died 11 months before my dad. He was, and this I believe genuinely, because I met him and I made my assessment carefully, a pleasant, quiet, well-meaning man who had absolutely no idea who he had for a daughter. I flew home for Thanksgiving that year. My mother had invited Raymond for dinner. He brought a bottle of wine and he helped clear the table and he asked me what I did for work and he listened, actually listened, when I told him I was a paralegal at a family law firm in Columbus and he said, "That must be hard, you must hear some terrible stories." And I said, "Mostly I just file papers." And he smiled. He had a kind, forgettable face. He seemed harmless. Paulette was not there that Thanksgiving. She was, my mother explained, spending the holiday with her ex-husband's family for the sake of her son, Tyler, who was 8. I nodded. I filed that information away. I will tell you now what I did not know then. I did not know that Raymond's daughter had already been to visit that house on Fairview Avenue twice. I did not know she had walked through the rooms. I did not know she had stood in the kitchen and commented on the counter space and looked at the backyard and said something to her father that he didn't fully repeat to my mother, only that it was a beautiful property, which is a specific phrase to use about a home where someone is still living. I didn't know any of that yet. I was just sitting at my mother's table eating her good food and watching Raymond be politely interested in my life and thinking, she deserves this. She has earned this. She is allowed to have something nice. I was right about one of those things. They married 18 months later. I was there. It was small, my mother's request, just family and close friends at the courthouse, followed by dinner at a restaurant on High Street that she had picked specifically because it had good lighting and a prix-fixe menu, and she did not want to deal with anyone staring at a list of options for 20 minutes when the point was to eat together. There were 8 of us at the table. Me, my mother and Raymond, Raymond's sister Alina from Cincinnati, Paulette and her son Tyler, my mother's best friend Connie, and Connie's husband Frank. That was it. My mother wore a pale blue dress she'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack that she had described to me on the phone as tasteful but not funereal. She looked happy. She looked, in a way I hadn't seen since before my father's headache, like herself. Paulette sat across from me at dinner. She was 41 at the time. Blonde hair, that particular shade of blonde that costs a specific amount at a specific salon and is maintained on a very specific schedule. She was dressed well in the way that reads as deliberate effort made to look effortless. She smiled at me when I sat down with a smile that reached her eyes imperfectly. The muscles around her mouth moved, but there was something in the eyes that was doing something else entirely. Assessing. Cataloging. I have worked in family law long enough to know what that look means. I have sat across from it in depositions. I have watched it from behind a partition in a conference room. I set my fork down, and I noted it, and I smiled back with a smile that I have also practiced for professional settings. "Diana," she said, "your mom talks about you constantly." "She's good at that," I said. "Do you live close by?" "Clintonville, about 15 minutes. "Oh, that's nice, a beat. Do you get over here often?" "Not, it must be lovely to be close to her. Not, I'm sure she loves having you nearby. Do you get over here often?" Which is a question about frequency of visits, framed as casual interest, which was actually a question about access. I noticed it, I put it away, I smiled. "Whenever I can," I said. Tyler, Paulette's son, was 9 by then and sitting 2 seats down and was absorbed entirely in a bread roll, which was the most relatable thing anyone at that table did all evening. Raymond gave a small toast that was genuine and a little awkward. He said my mother was the best thing that had happened to him in a very dark stretch of years, and that he hoped she knew that, and she patted his hand and said, "Raymond, we know." And everyone laughed, including Paulette, and the moment passed. After dinner, in the parking lot, while Raymond was getting the car, Paulette appeared beside me. We were both in our coats. The night was cold and clear, one of those February nights in Columbus where the sky is unusually full of stars because the air has no patience for anything soft. "Your mother is so lovely," she said. "She is," I said. "Dad is really lucky, they're both really lucky." A pause. She was looking out at the parking lot. "The house is incredible, by the way. I've only seen it a couple of times, but it has so much potential." I looked at her. Potential for what? She laughed, a short, bright laugh that meant nothing. "Oh, it's a great neighborhood. Great bones." "She's lived there for 30 years, I said. Of course she has." Another smile. "It's just it's such a wonderful house. It'd be a shame not to make the most of it." My mother came out of the restaurant then, pulling her coat closed against the cold, and Raymond's car appeared at the curb, and Paulette moved away to collect Tyler from the sidewalk where he had crouched to examine something on the pavement that was only interesting to a 9-year-old. And I stood there for a moment in the parking lot. Make the most of it. I drove home, and I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself Paulette was making awkward conversation at her father's wedding, and that not every woman at a dinner table is a villain. I told myself that my professional life had made me suspicious of normal human behavior, and that I needed to recalibrate. I believed this for about 3 years. In those 3 years, Raymond moved into the Fairview Avenue house. Paulette visited frequently, more than I did in raw number of visits, though I lived closer. She would come on Sunday afternoons and help with yard work or bring Tyler to play in the backyard. My mother reported these visits to me with a kind of careful neutrality, not enthusiasm, but not complaint either. Paulette was over again. Paulette helped Raymond clean out the gutters. Tyler is getting so tall. I noticed my mother never said Paulette came to see me. It was always Paulette was over or Paulette was here. A small thing. The difference between a person visiting you and a person being present in your home. I noticed Raymond deferred to Paulette in small ways. A sentence started and then adjusted mid-thought when she was in the room. A plan mentioned and then quietly unmentioned when she'd expressed something close to disapproval. He was not, I want to be clear, a bad man. He was a man who had spent his whole adult life making peace, and he had a daughter who had learned very early that peace was a resource to be managed, not a state to be maintained. I noticed my mother went quiet sometimes, after Paulette's visits, in a way she didn't go quiet after mine. I noticed, and I didn't press, because my mother was an adult and she had told me once, directly, the way she told me everything, "Diana, I am 62 years old. I do not need protecting." She was right, she did not need protecting. She needed someone paying attention. I was paying attention, I just wasn't fast enough. It starts in year 3 of the marriage. I am in my car outside my office on a Wednesday afternoon in November, and my mother is calling me, which is not unusual. What is unusual is the second time she calls, 15 minutes after the first call ended. My mother is not a double caller. She is a woman who says what she means the first time and then waits for the world to respond. I answer, "Mom, everything okay?" A pause, not her usual pause, the one where she's deciding how much truth to offer. A different one, the kind where she's deciding whether to start at all. "Raymond had a conversation with someone," she says. "A realtor." I am very still. What kind of conversation? An informational kind. That's what he said, just an appraisal, just to know what the house is worth. Her voice is completely level. That's how I know she is not okay. He says Paulette suggested it, just to have the number. Why would Paulette want the number? I asked him that. What did he say? He said she's just being practical, planning ahead, a beat, for them. I sit in my car for a moment. There's a sound outside, a truck passing on 4th Street, a woman walking by with a dog that's pulling the leash. Normal sounds, I focus on them. Mom, I say, is your name on the deed? She doesn't answer immediately. Mom. It's always been in my name, she says. But when we married, there's something Raymond asked me to sign. Early on, just a document for his estate planning. He said it was routine. What document? I don't remember exactly what it was called. His attorney prepared it. Another pause. It had something to do with rights of survivorship. I close my eyes. Rights of survivorship on jointly held property means that if one owner dies, the property passes automatically to the surviving owner, outside of the will, outside of probate, outside of anyone else's claim. If my mother had signed a document adding Raymond to the deed with rights of survivorship, then if she died before him, the house would become his. Entirely. And then, when he died, it would pass to whoever he named in his estate plan. Which, if Paulette had anything to say about it, would be Paulette. When did you sign it? I ask. Maybe 3 months after the wedding. Her voice is careful. He presented it as a formality. We were married. He said it didn't make sense for me to be on it alone. Do you have a copy? Another pause, longer. I don't know where it is. This is when I understand what I am dealing with. Not because Paulette is definitively a villain yet. I still don't have the evidence for that. But because my mother, who reads the legal notices in the newspaper every morning, signed a property document 3 months into a second marriage and didn't keep a copy. My mother, who is specific and attentive and unmovable when she's made up her mind. My mother, who raised me to read everything before I signed it. She signed it because he handed it to her in her own kitchen and said it was a formality and she trusted him. She signed it because she was 60 years old and newly married, and she had decided that the life she was building deserved the benefit of the doubt. I don't blame her. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I don't blame her for 1 second. But I am sitting in my car outside my office on a Wednesday in November, and I understand, with a calm that surprises me, that I need to start paying very different attention. I spend the next 2 evenings calling in quiet favors at work, not asking anyone to do anything improper, just confirming my own understanding of Ohio property law, which I already know fairly well from 5 years in family law, but which I want to be certain about. Here is what I confirm. A deed with rights of survivorship recorded with the county would transfer the property to the surviving spouse automatically upon death. It would not be affected by my mother's will. Whatever she put in her will would be irrelevant to the house if the deed superseded it. I call the Franklin County Auditor's office. I give them the address on Fairview Avenue. I ask about the current ownership status on the property. The property is listed under both names, Vivian R. Mercer and Raymond G. Talbot, joint tenants with right of survivorship, recorded April 14th, 3 months and 11 days after their wedding. I sit with this information for a week before I say anything to my mother. Here is what I also do in that week. I begin a folder. It is a plain manila folder that I keep in my desk at home. I put in it a printout of the county auditor record. I write the date and the source at the top in pen. I don't know yet what I'm building. I just know that I am the kind of person who needs a place to put things when they start not adding up. The small things, in the months after that phone call. Paulette begins referring to the Fairview Avenue house as Dad's place. Not your place when speaking to my mother, not the house, Dad's place. I hear it once when I am visiting and they are there and Paulette says to Tyler, "Go wash your hands, we're about to eat at Dad's place." My mother is standing at the stove and she does not turn around when Paulette says it. Raymond begins having his mail forwarded to Fairview Avenue, which is normal, they are married, he lives there, but then Paulette begins having some of her mail sent there as well. Subscriptions. a magazine, nothing alarming individually, but my mother mentions it with that particular careful neutrality. At Christmas, Paulette brings a framed photograph that she hangs in the hallway without asking. It is a photograph of Raymond and his late wife Carol on their wedding day. It is a beautiful photograph. It is hung where my mother's photograph of my father used to be. My mother moves her photograph of my father to the bedroom. She does not comment on this to me. I only know because I notice the nail hole when I am walking to the bathroom. I add these things to the folder. I date each note. I don't know yet what I am building. But I am building something. My mother is diagnosed with ovarian cancer in March of year 5 of the marriage. Stage 3, she calls me herself. She uses the same voice she uses when she is telling me about traffic on 315, informational, forward-looking, no patience for excess emotion. I need you to know, she says, that I have already made an appointment with the oncologist for next Thursday, and I have printed out the questions I want to ask, and I am not interested in being treated like I am already gone. Okay, I say. I am telling you so that you can be informed, not so that you can be upset. Can I be both? I ask. A pause, then quietly, yes, you can be both. I drive to Fairview Avenue that evening. My mother is in the kitchen making soup, actually making it, standing at the stove, not sitting down, and she lets me hug her for a long time without moving away, which is how I know she is allowing herself to be scared, at least with me. Raymond is there. He looks, I want to be precise about this, he looks genuinely frightened. Not performatively. The fear is real, and it is the fear of a man who lost someone to cancer once and cannot believe he is standing at the edge of it again. I feel a complicated tenderness toward him in that moment that I have not felt before and have not entirely felt since. Paulette arrives an hour later. She was not called. She says her father texted her, and of course he did, of course he told his daughter, but she is there within the hour, sitting at my mother's table, and the first thing she says after the initial shock of it is, "Dad, you need to make sure everything is in order." My mother looks at her. With the house, Paulette says, with the estate planning, you don't want anything left ambiguous. There is a silence in that kitchen that is very specific. I know this silence from work. It is the silence that happens when someone has said the thing they meant to say and framed it as concern. Vivian's the one who's sick, I say, not Raymond. Paulette looks at me. Of course, I just mean, you never know. Everyone should have their affairs in order. I'm just thinking practically. That's thoughtful of you, my mother says. Her voice is pleasant and entirely flat. Raymond, can you get me the pepper grinder? It's on the second shelf. The conversation ends there. Raymond gets the pepper grinder. Paulette stays for another hour and is warm and helpful and says all the right things about the oncologist and treatment options, and she squeezes my mother's hand when she leaves. I watch all of it and I keep my face arranged pleasantly, and I drive home and I sit at my desk and I open my folder. What I am going to tell you next I did not find out until much later. I am telling you now so you understand the timeline. Sometime in the following 3 months, while my mother was in chemotherapy, while she was losing her hair and keeping her opinions and refusing to stop reading the newspaper in the morning, Paulette had a conversation with Raymond about his estate plan. I know this because his attorney later confirmed the dates of their meetings, which were subpoenaed. Raymond met with his estate attorney twice in those 3 months. He updated his will. The updated will, should he predecease my mother, left the house on Fairview Avenue to Paulette with a life tenancy for my mother. Meaning, my mother could live there until she died, but the property would be Paulette's from the moment Raymond's will was executed. If my mother predeceased Raymond, which was now looking much more possible, the house would pass to Raymond via the survivorship deed, and then to Paulette as his primary heir. My mother was not told about the will update. I don't know if Raymond knew she should have been. What I do know is that my mother, in October of that year, 8 months into her diagnosis, 6 months into treatment, At a point when her numbers were improving and her oncologist was using cautiously positive language, my mother drove herself to the UPS store on Broad Street on a Tuesday afternoon, and she asked for a notary. I know this because Margaret Okonkwo, who is my mother's neighbor of 16 years and whose kitchen window faces directly onto the driveway of the Fairview Avenue house, saw my mother back out of the driveway that Tuesday at 1:30 in the afternoon. Margaret noted it because my mother did not usually drive herself anywhere during treatment weeks. She was usually too tired. Margaret noted it the way she noted everything about that street, which was comprehensively and without apology. I know the rest because of what I found in a shoebox under my mother's bed 14 months later. The shoebox was blue. It was a shoebox from a pair of New Balance walking shoes my mother had bought in 2019. It lived under the left side of the bed, her side pushed to the back. Inside it, her original will, unchanged since 2011, the deed to the car, her social security card, a photograph of my father taken on a camping trip in 1994 where he is squinting into the sun and grinning. A birthday card from me from maybe 2015 that I did not remember sending. And a folded 3-page document, handwritten in her careful, upright cursive, with 3 signatures, 1 per page, and a notarization stamp from the Franklin County Notary at the UPS store on Broad Street, witnessed by Margaret Okonkwo. It was a handwritten amendment to her will, drafted by her, signed by her, witnessed and notarized. It was not a lawyer-drafted document. It was a woman who had read every legal notice in the Columbus Dispatch for 20 years, sitting down with a legal pad and writing out in plain language what she wanted to happen to the thing she had built. She had done her research. She had used the correct language for Ohio codicil law. She had gotten a witness and a notary. She had done everything right. In it, she specified that the house on Fairview Avenue, which she acknowledged was jointly held, but which she intended to address through separate legal action if time permitted, and if not, through this document as her stated intent, was to pass to her daughter, Diana Mercer, and that any claim on the property by anyone connected to the estate of Raymond G. Talbot was to be challenged by her executor, using this document as evidence of her wishes, and of any undue influence that had been exerted upon her without her knowledge. She had written in her own handwriting the phrase undue influence. She had dated it. She had signed it 3 times. She had put it in a shoebox, and she had not told me. I think about why she didn't tell me all the time. The closest I've come to an answer, she was trying to protect me from worry during her treatment. She believed she had more time. She thought she would eventually talk to an attorney and do this properly. She was, despite everything, still giving Raymond the benefit of the doubt, still hoping she was wrong about Paulette, still hoping she would not need the shoebox. She was not wrong about Paulette. And she ran out of time. My mother dies on a Thursday morning in January, in the house on Fairview Avenue, in her bed, with Raymond beside her and me holding her left hand. She is 69 years old. She had 6 good months, better than good, almost normal after treatment, and then the numbers changed, and after that things moved faster than the oncologist had predicted. She was herself until very close to the end. She had opinions. She read the newspaper. She told me the tomatoes needed to go in earlier this year, in March instead of April, because the spring had been mild. I am not going to describe her death in detail because it belongs to her, and I choose to keep that. What I will tell you is the 48 hours after. The hospice nurse who came had a name I forgot, and a manner I've kept. She was efficient and gentle in exactly equal measure, and she handled all the arrangements with a professional grace that I needed desperately right then. Raymond he was undone. Genuinely undone. I want to say that again because it matters. Raymond was a man who loved my mother, and who was now the second person he had loved to die, and whatever came after, he was grieving. I do not confuse what happened next with who Raymond was as a man. I hold both things. Paulette arrived within 2 hours. She had brought food, a casserole, some rolls, fruit salad in a container. She had brought Tyler, who was now 16 and very tall, and who stood in the doorway of the living room looking uncomfortable in the particular way teenage boys look uncomfortable when confronted with grief they don't know what to do with. She organized the food in the refrigerator. She made calls. She was efficient and helpful, and I stood in my mother's kitchen and watched her move around it like she had already decided it was hers. I drove home that night, and I sat in my apartment for 3 hours without turning on a light. I went back the next morning for the arrangements, the funeral home, the death certificate, the notices to neighbors. Paulette was there again. Raymond was still in a fog of grief, and Paulette was making decisions on his behalf with the smoothness of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Which funeral home, which flowers, which obituary wording. She had opinions about all of it. She expressed them to Raymond, and Raymond nodded, and I stood beside the kitchen counter and watched. My mother's obituary, as published 2 days later in the Columbus Dispatch, listed her survivors as her husband Raymond Talbot and her stepdaughter Paulette Talbot Greer. I was listed as daughter Diana Mercer in the middle of the paragraph. It is a small thing. It is the kind of small thing that tells you everything. I was not asked about the obituary. The eviction notice arrived on a Monday. It was 11 days after the funeral. I was at my apartment when the certified mail came, addressed to me, which surprised me because I don't live on Fairview Avenue. Someone had found my address, which takes a specific kind of initiative. The document was professionally drafted, attorney letterhead, clean formatting, appropriate citations. It stated that as of the date of Vivian Mercer Talbot's death, the property at Fairview Avenue had passed in full to Raymond G. Talbot as the surviving joint tenant, that Raymond had assigned interest in the property to his daughter Paulette Talbot Greer as part of his estate management, and that Diana Mercer, as a non-resident with no documented claim to the property, had 47 days from the date of the letter to remove any personal property from the premises before the property would be considered fully transferred. 47 days. I sat at my kitchen table and I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. Then I called my office. I work at a firm that does primarily family law, but we have colleagues who handle estate and property matters, and I said, I need someone to look at something. Today. I met with a colleague named Philip Adami that afternoon. Philip is our estate specialist, 47 years old, meticulous, the kind of attorney who reads documents the way my mother read the newspaper, cover to cover, including the legal notices. I gave him the eviction letter. I gave him the county auditor record of the joint tenancy deed. He read everything. The deed transfer is solid, he said. If she signed it and it was recorded, the survivorship is clean. She signed it, I said. 3 months into the marriage, she didn't have independent counsel. Philip looked at me. Was there any indication she didn't understand what she was signing? She understood it, I said. She told me about it years later. She just didn't anticipate. I stopped. Reorganized. Her estate attorney is someone she used in 2011 when she originally wrote her will. I haven't spoken to them yet, but I think there may be something. What kind of something? A codicil, I said. Handwritten. I haven't looked at it closely yet. I found it yesterday. Philip was very still for a moment. Show me when you have it. I drove to Fairview Avenue that evening. Raymond answered the door. He looked terrible, gray, worn through, and he let me in without a word. I walked to my mother's bedroom. The room smelled like her, like the particular lotion she had used for 20 years, and like something warmer underneath that I cannot name. I got down on my knees beside the bed and I reached to the back, under the left side, and I pulled out the blue shoebox. It was still there. I took it home. I sat at my kitchen table under the good lamp and I read every page of that handwritten amendment 3 times. I read the notarization. I looked up the notary, still active, registered in Franklin County. I looked up Margaret Okonkwo on the county records, still at the same address on Fairview Avenue, had been for 20 years. And I thought, she did everything right. She just ran out of time to hand it to someone who could use it. I called Philip the next morning at 8 o'clock. I have something, I said. I need you to see it today. We had 46 days left. Margaret Okonkwo is 67 years old, and she has lived on Fairview Avenue for 22 years, and she knows exactly what her neighbors do and when they do it, and she does not apologize for this. I am a retired school principal, she told Philip and me when we came to see her on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the eviction notice arrived. I spent 31 years paying attention to children who thought they were invisible. Noticing things is a professional skill, and I have no intention of turning it off. She said this at her kitchen table, sitting very straight, wearing a yellow cardigan and holding a mug of tea she had made for us and then not drunk. She had a yellow legal pad at her elbow, which she had prepared before we arrived, because she had been expecting this visit. She said when I called her that she had been wondering when I'd call. I need to ask you about October of 2 years ago, I said. A Tuesday. Do you remember my mother going somewhere in the afternoon? I remember it, she said immediately. I was at my window doing the crossword. She backed out at 1:30. I checked because she normally didn't go anywhere on treatment days, and I was going to call if she wasn't back by 4. Was she back by 4? 2:45. She had a bag from the UPS store, those plastic bags they give you, brown and tan. She went straight inside. Philip wrote something on his pad. Mrs. Okonkwo. Ms., she said. A Ms. Okonkwo, did you witness a document for Vivian Mercer around that time? Margaret looked at him and then at me. About 2 weeks later, yes. She called me and said she had something that needed a witness signature. She was very specific that she wanted someone who wasn't Raymond, and who wasn't connected to Raymond, and who would remember it. What happened? She brought the document to my door. 3 pages, handwritten. She explained what it was, an amendment to her will, she said. She had already had it notarized at the UPS store, but she needed an independent witness for the full codicil to be valid under Ohio law. She asked me to read it, which I did. And did you sign it? I signed all 3 pages. I dated each one. She gave me a copy, which I have in my files. She tapped the legal pad. I anticipated you'd want that. I looked at her. I had not known she had a copy. She asked me to keep it, Margaret said. She said, Margaret, I need someone outside this house to have this. Someone who won't lose it and won't be pressured. Those were her exact words. I wrote them down. She turned the legal pad to face us. She had made notes, dated. In the same meticulous hand she'd probably used grading papers for 30 years. She also told me something else. What was that? Philip asked. She said Paulette had been going through her files. Margaret said it plainly, without drama. She didn't catch her directly, but some things had been moved in her study, her personal files, the ones in the bottom drawer of the desk. She couldn't prove it, but she knew. She was very specific about what she knew and what she could only suspect. She was not a woman who confused the two. My mother, specific, attentive. Did she tell Raymond? I asked. She said she tried once. He said she was mistaken. She said, Margaret, when someone tells you you're mistaken about something you know you saw, you learn something very important about them. Margaret picked up her tea. I told her she should call you. She said she didn't want to worry you while she was still in treatment. I looked at the table for a moment. She talked about you constantly, Margaret said, more quietly. She said you were the most competent person she'd ever raised, which was quite a compliment because I gather she had high standards. A small, warm smile. She was very proud. She wanted to solve this herself first. She didn't want to be rescued. She wanted to hand you something finished. She ran out of time. She handed me something unfinished. But she had handed it to Margaret first, and Margaret had kept it in her files for 14 months waiting for exactly this. Will you testify? Philip asked. I've been waiting to be asked, she said. She testified. She was the clearest witness I have ever seen in any proceeding, and I have sat behind the partition in more proceedings than I can count. She had her legal pad. She had her copy of the document. She had her notes from the day my mother came to her door with the document and asked her to be the kind of person who would remember. My mother chose well. Philip's assessment, after we left Margaret's house, was cautiously direct. The codicil is imperfect because it wasn't prepared by an attorney, and it doesn't directly address the survivorship deed, which is a separate legal instrument. But she cited undue influence, and she used correct Ohio codicil language, and the notarization and witness are legitimate. If we can establish a pattern of behavior from Paulette that supports the undue influence claim, and if we can argue that the survivorship deed was entered into under similar circumstances, that your mother didn't have independent counsel, that she wasn't advised of the full implications, we have something to work with. How much of something? I asked. Enough to contest, enough to get a hearing. He looked at his notes. It won't be fast. I know, I said. And it won't be easy. I know that too. He nodded. We were standing in the parking lot outside Margaret's house, and it was cold, and the sky was the color of old pewter. And I was thinking about my mother driving herself to the UPS store on a Tuesday when she was too tired to drive, because she wanted to have something finished before she handed it to me. Let's start filing, I said. I want to tell you about the last afternoon I spent with my mother when she was still herself. It was in November, 7 weeks before she died. She was in the house on Fairview Avenue, in the kitchen, which is where she preferred to be when she wasn't in her bedroom. Raymond was somewhere out, or in the back, I don't remember exactly. I remember it being just the two of us at the table. She had made soup. She was always making soup in the last months, because it was warm and because she could do it while sitting, and because the smell of it made the house feel occupied in the way she needed it to feel. It was a vegetable soup, very simple, with good stock and whatever was in the fridge. I ate 2 bowls of it, and she watched me eat the second one with what I can only describe as satisfaction. You always eat like you're afraid someone will take it, she said. You always cook like you're afraid someone won't, I said back. She smiled. She had lost her hair twice, once during the first round of treatment, and it had grown back gray and soft, and now she wore it like that, short and gray and her own, and it suited her in a way I think she knew. I've been thinking about the garden, she said. The tomatoes. The whole thing, the layout. I want to put in herbs next spring, rosemary along the back fence. It'll come back every year and you won't have to replant. You won't have to replant, I said. She looked at me. I said again, you won't have to. She let it pass. That's how she accepted things she wasn't ready to say directly. She let them pass and moved on to the next sentence, and you understood each other without having to name it. I want you to take the photograph from the bedroom when the time comes, she said. The one of your father on the camping trip. I don't want it to be, I just want you to have it. Okay. And the soup pot, the big one, the blue enamel, take that too. Mom. I'm not being morbid, I'm being organized. She looked at her own bowl of soup. There's a difference. I had the folder at home. I had started building the legal record, the auditor documents, my notes, the timeline I'd been keeping for years. I had not told her any of it yet because I did not want her last months to be about a fight. I did not want her to spend what she had left worrying about a document. I understand now that she knew. She had made her own folder. She had driven to the UPS store and she had knocked on Margaret's door. She was not oblivious. She was protecting me from the worry the same way I was protecting her. We sat in that kitchen and we ate soup and we talked about the garden and we did not say the things we were both thinking. And I am grateful for that afternoon. I am grateful we chose soup and tomatoes and the blue enamel pot instead of lawyers and deeds and survivorship rights. She died 7 weeks later. I took the photograph in the soup pot. I still have both. Philip files our initial response to the eviction notice on day 46. We have 1 day to spare. The response disputes the eviction on grounds of disputed property interest, cites the handwritten codicil and the undue influence language, and formally requests a stay of any transfer actions pending a hearing. It is 12 pages. Philip is meticulous. Every citation is correct. Every date is documented. Paulette's attorney, a man named Garrett Finch from a firm in Dublin, Ohio, calls Philip the following morning. I am in Philip's office when he takes the call on speaker. Finch is professional and measured, and he says, in that particular tone attorneys use when they believe the other side doesn't understand the situation, that the survivorship deed is a recorded legal instrument and takes precedence over any unwitnessed handwritten document, and that if we want to contest the deed itself rather than the will amendment, we're going to need more than a piece of paper from a shoebox. Philip says, pleasantly, the piece of paper from the shoebox was witnessed and notarized, and the witness is available to testify to the circumstances of its creation, including statements made by the decedent regarding the conduct of your client in the period prior to her death. A pause on the line. What statements? I think we'll let those emerge in the proceeding, Philip said. Another pause, longer. We're willing to discuss a settlement. We're not, I said. Philip looked at me, I looked at him, he looked back at the phone. Ms. Mercer has indicated she'd prefer to let the matter proceed, Philip said. Finch said they'd see us at the hearing. Here is what the hearing process revealed, and I want to give you the shape of this because the details matter. During discovery, we subpoenaed Raymond's estate attorney's records. This was not difficult because Raymond, when Philip called him directly and explained what was being alleged and what Margaret Okonkwo's testimony would contain, agreed to cooperate. This surprised me. It should not have. Raymond is a man who had been steered by his daughter for years without fully realizing the destination. When someone finally showed him a map, he did not like where he had been heading. Raymond's estate attorney's records revealed that Paulette had attended 2 of Raymond's estate planning meetings, not as a neutral party, but as a participant who gave input on the specific disposition of the Fairview Avenue property. His attorney, to her credit, had noted in her file that she had concerns about the influence being exerted and had recommended Raymond retain independent counsel, which he had not done. The survivorship deed itself. When we traced the documentation carefully, we found that my mother had signed it at her kitchen table, presented by Raymond's attorney at a meeting she had not been independently advised to bring her own counsel to. She had not been given a copy before the meeting. She had been told, this is in the attorney's notes from the meeting, which were subpoenaed, that the document was a standard marital property formality. She had been given 15 minutes to review it. 15 minutes, for a document that transferred her home. My mother was a woman who read the legal notices in the newspaper every morning. She would have caught every implication of that deed if she had been given real time and real counsel. She was not given real time and real counsel. She was given a kitchen table and 15 minutes, and the implicit social pressure of a new husband and his attorney looking at her and waiting. Was this criminal? No. Was it undue influence in the legal sense? Philip said it was arguable. Was it Paulette's orchestration specifically? That's where the testimony got complicated. What Raymond told Philip, in a conversation that happened after we showed him the codicil, and after he'd had 2 weeks to sit with what it said, specifically, the phrase undue influence exerted without my knowledge. What Raymond told Philip was this. Paulette had come to him approximately 4 months after the wedding and told him that she was concerned about estate planning. For both of you, she said, and that she had spoken to an attorney friend about the best way to structure things, and that the attorney had suggested the survivorship deed as the cleanest solution. She had made the appointment with the estate attorney. She had been present at the first meeting. She had explained to Raymond what the document meant in general terms that were accurate but incomplete. She had framed all of it as protection for him. She had not told him what it would mean for my mother. Or perhaps she had, in the quiet, deniable way that someone like Paulette communicates the things she means, and Raymond had understood, but hadn't wanted to look directly at it. He told Philip, I thought Vivian had read it, I thought she understood. He was crying when he said it. Philip told me this later, and I believed him, and I held it alongside everything else I knew. This is the architecture of what Paulette built. She used her father's grief, his trust, his willingness to defer to her on practical matters, and she walked him into a deed transfer he didn't fully understand, for a property she had been cataloging since before the wedding. She did it without anyone's fingerprints showing. She did it with casseroles and Sunday visits and the photograph of Carol in the hallway. She did it over years, patiently, efficiently, and she had probably told herself at every step that she was just being practical. That phrase, just being practical. I had heard it in a cold parking lot 10 years ago. I had written it in my folder. Now it was in the discovery record. I will tell you about the moment I decided I was not going to let this be quiet. It was day 3 after the eviction notice arrived. I was in my apartment, and Philip had told me we had a case and that I needed to decide how far I wanted to take it. He said it carefully and thoroughly, the way he does everything. There was the codicil, there was the undue influence argument, there was Margaret's testimony, there was Raymond's willingness to cooperate. There was also the reality that legal proceedings take time and energy, and I was a woman who had just lost her mother and might want to consider settling for some form of acknowledgement rather than a full hearing. He didn't tell me what to choose. He laid out the map and let me look at it. I sat with it for 3 days. I thought about my mother in the UPS store on a Tuesday when she was too tired to drive. I thought about her sitting at Margaret's door with 3 pages of handwriting and asking to be remembered. I thought about 15 minutes at a kitchen table with an attorney she hadn't hired. I thought about Dad's place. I thought about Carol's photograph in the hallway. I thought about Paulette in the cold parking lot saying the house had potential. And then I thought about something simpler. My mother had done everything right. She had read the notices. She had written it down. She had gotten it witnessed and notarized. She had handed a copy to the neighbor who would remember. She had done everything right, and she had run out of time to see it finished. I was going to finish it. I called Philip on day 3 and I said, "We go to hearing, all the way." He said, "Okay." Then he said, "There's something else you should know. Raymond called me this morning. He wants to amend his estate documents. He wants to make clear that whatever the outcome of the hearing, his intention, his current intention, documented, is that any interest he holds in the Fairview Avenue property following the hearing should pass to Diana Mercer rather than to Paulette Talbot Greer." I was quiet for a moment. He said, Philip continued, and I'm quoting him directly, "I should have paid better attention. Vivian deserved better from me, and so does her daughter." I didn't say anything for a while. "He's not your adversary," Philip said gently. "He never really was." "I know," I said. I did know. I had known for a while. The adversary was the one who had stood in a parking lot and said the house had potential and had never once, in 11 years, called it my mother's home. I found my ally in my cousin Renata, who is not an attorney but who is extraordinarily organized and who had helped me compile and cross-reference the document timeline. Renata is the kind of person who color codes things and whose color coding turns out to be useful rather than compulsive. She had been helping me since week 2, quietly, at my kitchen table, with a highlighter and a calendar, and a patience I didn't fully deserve. "What do you need?" she asked me when I called her and told her we were going to hearing. "Everything dated," I said. "Every note, every document, every record I've kept since 2013. "I already did it," she said. "I've been waiting for you to ask." The hearing process takes 18 months. I want to be honest about that because people sometimes hear stories like this and imagine that justice arrives quickly once the right documents are in place. It does not. Justice, in my experience, and I have more experience with legal proceedings than most people my age, is slow and procedural and exhausting and requires you to be willing to keep doing the work long after the dramatic part is over. Here is what 18 months looks like from inside. Month 1, Philip files the formal contest. Paulette's attorney files a motion to dismiss on the grounds that the codicil is insufficient to override the survivorship deed. We file a response. The judge does not dismiss. We are granted a preliminary hearing. Month 2, the preliminary hearing. Paulette attends with Garrett Finch. She is dressed impeccably. She looks, sitting across the room, exactly like someone who has done nothing wrong and is baffled to find themselves in a courtroom. I have watched this performance before in other hearings, and I know how it plays. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Frances Ackeffer, who has the manner of someone who has heard every version of every story and is not impressed by any of them, reviews the filings and grants a full hearing. She sets the date for 4 months out. Month 3, Discovery. We receive Raymond's estate records. We depose the estate attorney who handled the survivorship deed. She is professional and uncomfortable. She acknowledges that she recommended independent counsel for my mother. She acknowledges my mother was not given advance notice of the document's contents. She does not acknowledge any wrongdoing. Attorneys rarely do in depositions, but she provides the factual record that we need. Month 4, we depose Paulette. Paulette is composed and precise. She has clearly been coached. Every answer she gives is technically accurate, and every answer leaves exactly the relevant implication unstated. She says she was just trying to help her father with practical matters after a difficult period. She says she had no specific interest in the outcome of the property transfer. She says she cared deeply about Vivian and about making sure Dad was taken care of. When Philip asks her about the parking lot conversation from the night of the wedding, whether she had said the house had potential, and what she meant by that, she says she doesn't specifically recall the conversation, but that she certainly didn't mean anything by it. Philip asks her if she recommended the estate attorney to her father. She says she may have mentioned someone, yes. He asks if she attended the meeting with that attorney where the survivorship deed was presented to my mother. She says she may have briefly stopped in, yes, she was in the building. He asks if she advised her father on the contents of his updated will, specifically the section addressing the Fairview Avenue property, in the months following my mother's cancer diagnosis. A pause. I may have discussed some general concerns with him, yes. General concerns about what? About making sure everything was in order. Can you be more specific about what you meant by in order? I just meant estate planning, you never know. Philip lets that sit for a moment. You never know, he repeats. He moves on. Month 6, Raymond's amended estate documents are filed. In them, he formally designates Diana Mercer as his preferred heir to the Fairview Avenue property in the event he survives the hearing and the property remains in his name. Paulette's attorney files a formal objection to this amendment on grounds that it was made under duress, specifically, the duress of the ongoing legal proceedings. Judge Ackeffer denies the objection. Month 9, the hearing begins. Month 9 through month 14. The hearing proceeds in segments, which is how long hearings work in estate matters. Not one dramatic day in a courtroom. Multiple sessions spread across months with gaps in between for both sides to review testimony, file responses, submit additional documentation. I sit in that courtroom for 7 sessions. I watch Margaret Okonkwo testify. I watch her be cross-examined by Garrett Finch, who is good at his job and who attempts to establish that she was emotionally invested in the outcome, being a close neighbor and friend of the deceased. Margaret looks at him and says, I am testifying about what I witnessed. I do not require a personal investment in outcomes to report facts accurately. That is a different skill set from caring about someone. Finch does not follow up on that. I watch Raymond testify. He is gray and diminished-looking, not performatively, genuinely worn. He testifies about the estate planning meetings, about the deed, about what Paulette had told him. His voice shakes in places and he does not attempt to hide it. He says when Philip asks him directly, I should have made sure Vivian had her own counsel before she signed anything. I trusted that my daughter was thinking of both of us. I was wrong about that. I do not look at Paulette during this testimony. I look at my hands. Month 14, Closing Arguments. Month 16, Philip calls me on a Thursday morning. Judge Acaffer has issued her ruling. I ask him to tell me in person. He says he'll come to my office. He is smiling when he walks in. He is not usually a person who leads with a smile. She found in your favor, he says, on both grounds. Judge Francis Acaffer's ruling is 43 pages long. I have read all of it. I have read it 3 times. I want to give you the shape of it because the language she used matters to me, and I think it will matter to you. On the question of the codicil, Judge Acaffer found that the handwritten amendment met the requirements of a valid Ohio codicil. She noted that the document was written in clear, legally cognizant language by a woman who demonstrated throughout her life a sophisticated understanding of property and estate matters. She noted the notarization and the independent witness. She noted Margaret's testimony, which she described in the ruling as consistent, specific, and corroborated by documentary evidence. She found the codicil to be a valid expression of Vivian Mercer's testamentary intent. On the question of undue influence, this was the harder argument. The survivorship deed is a recorded legal instrument. Overturning it on grounds of undue influence requires establishing that the signing party was in a position of vulnerability, that the influencing party had a position of trust or authority, and that the result was something the signing party would not have chosen without that influence. Judge Acaffer found that the evidence supported all 3 elements. She wrote, and I want to give you her language as closely as I can without quoting directly. She wrote that the evidence showed a sustained pattern of conduct beginning before the marriage and continuing through my mother's illness. Access to information about the property before it was offered, participation in estate planning meetings without independent invitation, influence over document language, and timing that benefited a third party at the expense of the primary property owner. She noted that my mother's own words in the codicil used the language, undue influence exerted without my knowledge. And she found this language, coming from a woman of clear legal sophistication, to be significant rather than incidental. She found the survivorship deed to be voidable on grounds of constructive undue influence. Not fraudulent, she was careful about that distinction, but voidable, meaning the circumstances of its execution were sufficiently irregular, and the absence of independent counsel for my mother sufficiently notable, and the pattern of conduct surrounding it sufficiently documented, that the deed could not stand as an unchallenged instrument. She remanded the property back to my mother's estate. She ordered that the estate be administered in accordance with my mother's original will and the valid codicil, which together designated me as the primary heir to the Fairview Avenue property. She also, and this is not something I anticipated, she included a paragraph in the ruling that addressed Paulette directly. Not by name in a punitive way, but in the way a judge addresses a party when they want the record to reflect something. She wrote that the court had observed, throughout this proceeding, a pattern of conduct from one party that fell within the accepted definition of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Specifically, an elderly woman with a serious illness. And while the court could not impose criminal findings, it was noting this pattern for the record and referring the matter to the appropriate county office for any follow-up action they deemed warranted. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, in the ruling, in black and white. I read that paragraph 4 times the first time I opened the document. Then I closed it, and I sat at my desk for a while. Philip and I went to Fairview Avenue 2 days after the ruling was formally entered. We had called Raymond. He let us in. He made coffee, which he did carefully and without speaking much. He had the manner of a man who has accepted something difficult and is not looking for anyone to help him carry it. Paulette was in the kitchen. She had been staying there, this I had not known, but Raymond explained later that she had moved some things in during the hearing, just to help, and he had not pushed back. She was standing by the counter with a mug when Philip and I walked in. She was wearing nice clothes, and her hair was done, and she looked exactly as composed as she had in the deposition. Philip placed a copy of the ruling on the kitchen table. Paulette's attorney had already seen it, of course he had, he was notified simultaneously, but she had not yet read the full 43 pages. I watched her eyes move across the first page. I watched her read the paragraph about the codicil. I watched her get to the paragraph about undue influence. I watched her reach the paragraph with the referral to the county. I watched her face do something very small and very controlled. The muscles around her mouth tightened for exactly 1 second, and then she put the expression back. "We'll appeal," she said. "That's your right," Philip said. She looked at me for the first time. "She signed that deed. Your mother signed it." "She did," I said. "In her kitchen, in 15 minutes, without her own attorney, after you picked the estate attorney and made the appointment and sat in the room." She opened her mouth. "The ruling addresses all of that," I said. "It's on page 22. She looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. "This isn't over," she said. "You can appeal," I said, "but the codicil is valid and it's recorded and Margaret Okonkwo is still at the same address. So," I picked up my bag, "I hope Tyler is doing well." I walked out. Philip followed. Raymond walked us to the door and he shook Philip's hand and then he looked at me and said quietly, "She was a good woman, I'm sorry." "I know," I said. We stood on the porch of my mother's house for a moment. It was a mild spring afternoon. The garden was visible along the side of the house. The tomatoes not in yet, the soil turned but not planted, waiting. I thought about rosemary along the back fence. I thought about how it comes back every year if you plant it right. I went home. I would plant the garden in March. Paulette filed the appeal. I will be honest with you, the appeal was hard. Not legally, Philip told me from the beginning it had low probability of success, and he was right, but emotionally. There is something about being forced to relitigate a thing you have already won that requires a specific kind of stamina. You have to keep the folder open. You have to keep showing up. You have to resist the narrative that says winning once means you're done. The appeal took 7 months. Judge Acker's ruling was upheld on all primary grounds. The county referral produced an investigation that resulted in findings of elder financial exploitation, which did not result in criminal charges, but did result in a formal county determination, public record, that Paulette Talbot Greer had engaged in conduct meeting the definition. The county doesn't publicize these findings, but they are findable, and Philip told me Finch was very aware of how findable they were. Paulette did not come back to Fairview Avenue after the appeal ruling. I don't know where she lives now. I don't think about her very often. When I do think about her, it is not with rage. That surprised me, how little rage I carried once the legal process was finished. What I carry is something more like clear-eyed sorrow. For a man who trusted his daughter and was used as an instrument, for a woman who died before she got to see the thing she built stay in the hands she meant for it, for the years of quiet accumulation of small wrongs that nobody named out loud for too long. Raymond moved to a smaller apartment in Bexley 6 months after the ruling. He calls me sometimes. We don't have a relationship exactly. We have something more like a mutual acknowledgement of shared loss. He loved my mother genuinely. He failed her in specific ways. Both things are true, and I have decided I can hold both things without needing to resolve them into a simpler story. The house came to me. I had not, until the moment the deed was recorded in my name, fully understood what it would mean to stand in that kitchen with the title belonging to me. My mother bought this house in 1989. She paid off the mortgage in 2007. She said no one could take it from her. No one did. I moved in 6 months after the ruling. I kept most of the furniture because it was hers, and I wasn't ready to change it. I hung the photograph of my father, the camping trip, squinting into the sun back in the hallway where it belongs. I took down the photograph of Carol. Not because I have anything against Carol, who died of cancer and never hurt anyone, but because that hallway is my mother's house, and the walls remember what they've held. Margaret came over for dinner the first week. I made soup, the good stock, the blue enamel pot. She sat at the table my mother sat at and she ate 2 bowls and she said the same thing I always said to my mother. This is good. My mother's recipe, I said. I know, she said. She used to make it for me after her garden came in. We sat at the table for a while. The house was quiet in the way houses are when they're finally the right temperature, not silent, but settled. She would have liked this, Margaret said. I know, I said. She would have. She would have read the judges ruling the way she read the legal notices in the newspaper, carefully, with an opinion about every paragraph, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had always known what things were worth fighting for. The tomatoes went in March, the way she said. I had never planted a garden before. I have a gardening book now, a practical one, not a beautiful one, that I have read and annotated in the margins the way she annotated everything. I got the soil tested in January. I amended it with compost. I put the tomatoes in on March 15th, which was mild that year. They came up. I also planted rosemary along the back fence. It came back this spring without any help from me, which is what she said it would do. She was right, as she was right about most things she was specific about. I keep the blue shoebox on my desk. Not because I need it anymore. The legal copies are with Philip's firm and with the county, but because I want to see it. It is ordinary and it is blue, and it held everything my mother needed to say and didn't have time to say in person, and I am not going to put it in a drawer. I also keep Margaret's copy of the codicil. She offered to dispose of it after the appeal was upheld, and I said no, I would like to have it, and she handed it to me in its original envelope, still sealed from the day my mother brought it to her door. Margaret's handwriting is on the outside of the envelope, the date, the time, the address. Exactly what a retired school principal would do. Exactly what my mother counted on. The legal pad with Margaret's notes from our first meeting, I have that too. I keep it in the shoebox. I don't know why exactly. I just know that when I take the lid off the box and look at the contents, I see the outline of someone who planned ahead and paid attention and prepared as best she could. She prepared as best she could. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was enough when combined with 47 days and Philip and Margaret and Renata, and a judge named Francis Ockhaffer who read 43 pages of evidence and knew what she was looking at. My mother would have liked Philip, I think. She would have found his meticulousness satisfying. She would have found Margaret's legal pad appropriately thorough. She would have had opinions about the courtroom chairs. She would have thought Judge Ockhaffer was correct, and she would have said so in the particular way she said things she considered self-evident briefly, and without looking around for confirmation. I think about what she would say to me now, standing in this kitchen with the soup on the stove, and the rosemary growing along the fence, and the photograph of my father back in the hallway. I think she would say, good. Just that. She would pour herself a cup of coffee and look around the kitchen and say good, in the way she said things she meant fully and didn't need to elaborate. And then she would pick up the newspaper and read the legal notices. I read them now, not every day, but sometimes. She was right that you can tell a lot about a community by who is suing whom, and she was right about a lot of things. I keep the shoebox, I tend the garden, I read the legal notices. It's enough. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to say something to you directly. I am not an attorney. I am a paralegal who became a daughter, who became someone who had to fight for a thing that should have been simple. And here is what I want you to take from this if you take anything. Document things when they don't add up. Not because you're paranoid. Not because your family is full of villains. But because the people who exploit vulnerable adults are usually patient, and they are usually plausible, and they usually present themselves as the practical one, the responsible one, the one who is just trying to help. And they are usually right that most people won't be keeping a folder. Keep a folder. If you are in a situation where an aging parent is in a new relationship and you are noticing small things that don't add up, document them. Date them. If you ever need them, you will need the dates. If your parent ever asks you to be a witness to something, take it seriously. Take the time. Do it properly. Margaret Okonkwo changed the outcome of this case not by doing anything dramatic, but by signing her name twice in the presence of a notary, and then keeping the paperwork in her files for 14 months. Pay attention. Keep records. Don't let the social discomfort of naming a wrong stop you from naming it in writing, in private, for your own records. And if you have been through something like this, if someone in your life used a vulnerable person's trust to redirect what wasn't theirs, I want you to know that I see you. I want to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what you fought for. Tell me what you kept. This channel exists because these stories deserve to be told. Not for the drama. For the people who are sitting in their cars right now after a phone call with their mother, thinking something doesn't add up, wondering if they're overreacting. You're probably not overreacting. Pay attention, keep a folder. And I'll see you in the next one.